Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we begin with part 1 of A World Journey, Stabilizing Influence of England by the Imperator AMORC. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 32, Number 1, January 1954. The Thought of the Month, Stabilizing Influence of England by the Imperator AMORC. This article is one of a series being written by the Imperator after his return from a world journey in behalf of the Rosicrucian Order. Editor. A man cannot be educated unless he has an open mind, the greatest library in the world with unlimited reference works. Avails a man little if he persists in consulting only those works which confirm his preconceived opinions. Hegel, in his philosophy, stressed that only the whole is real. No single thing or particular is true in itself. If travel is to be broadening or educational, as it has been traditionally proclaimed, one must look upon the land and its people with the eyes of a spectator and not those of a critic. A critic is one who has acquired in some manner a standard by which all related experiences are judged. At the end of a journey, one can only truthfully say what he has liked best in his travels. Even that is influenced by his training and desires rather than by the inherent qualities of what he saw. In commenting upon the experiences of a journey, which again took me around the world and nearly the whole length of Africa for the Rosicrucian Order, I shall, in the main, try to confine myself to what I saw and heard. One cannot, however, help reacting to the impact of experience and forming opinions and conclusions. When these are offered, they will be designated as my own and distinct from the reality of what I encountered. Nor can it always be said that one who lives in a land has a better understanding of it. Habit sometimes causes us to accept many things as being proper only because we have isolated ourselves from other contacts. I have had the opportunity of visiting England a number of times in the last half century, and there are some impressions which reoccur each time and leave a deepening conviction. I am particularly impressed by the discipline of the mass English mind. There is an inherent sense of justice that seems to reach down through all the strata of society. It is an inbred love of fair play. It expresses itself in tolerance of the right to a different opinion. Whether this different concept be religious or political, it seems to be the unuttered consensus of opinion to let a man have a say. The English, no less than any other people, will rigorously oppose what they conceive to be a menace to their society or way of life. But freedom of expression is more evident, I believe, in England than in most other lands. In some of the other democracies, even though this freedom of religion and speech, for example, is a constitutional guarantee, it is in effect often mitigated by mass hysteria. Various religious and other pressure groups intensify the fear of communism to the point that any thought that does not follow the conventional pattern is looked upon with disfavor and suspicion. Eventually, this can lead to the inhibition of all progressive ideas for fear of being placed in the category of an inharmonious radical. In England, there appears less indication of organized religious movements attacking the various aspects of constitutional religious freedom. The public school system is not being undermined by statements in the public press or the sectarian journals as being atheistic, unchristian, and lacking in moral stimulus, and similar unfounded allegations so often making their appearance elsewhere in the Western world. There seems to be an agreement among the English people that any religious sect may have sanctuary in England so long as it does not attempt a surreptitious campaign for the domination of the government and its legislative branches. After all, a democracy is not alone an idealistic theory or a set of statutes on the books, but the actual will and expression of the people in their individual lives. I think one is made very conscious of the spirit of democracy in England, where, notwithstanding her tribulations, it remains strong and invigorating to the morale. Obvious improvements. In London and environs, there is evidence of a general improvement in business, the economic fog seeming to have lifted considerably. Exports are increasing, especially in such products as automobiles and heavy machinery as electric generators, printing and road construction equipment. The present administration, the Conservatives, are strident in declaring that these improvements are due to their parties being in power. Obviously, the opposition challenges these statements and credits any general acceleration of business to other factors. The yoke of taxes still rests heavily upon the shoulders of the English people. In this assumption of the circumstances of the times, England does not stand alone. However, the people of England have felt this oppression for a much longer period than, for example, has the United States. The slight reduction of income tax was more a psychological advantage, a going down instead of up, rather than offering an immediate relief. On the streets of London and in public gatherings, a change of attitude is reflected in the improved personal appearance of the people. They are better dressed. Statistics kept by the government indicate that the populace is spending more on apparel and food. The latter is probably due to the fact that most rationing has been lifted or considerably eased. The greatest rationing remains in the luxury lines, as silverware, fine linen, and certain woolens, even automobiles, which the English have made for years and which, like many other items they could not indulge in because they were for export only, are now available to them. Certain makes of cars, we were informed, can be had after waiting only 6 weeks, a prompt delivery in comparison with the custom of only a few years back. The banking institutions are, of course, encouraged by what they refer to as the return to conservatism. Cheap money, they say, has been curbed by the holding down of rising labor costs, which were encouraged by the socialists. The latter, of course, stress in reply that the rise in laborers' wages actually encouraged purchasing power and began the impetus upward which the country is beginning to realize. In quality, the merchandise available on the market is exceptionally good. There is, of course, an attempt to stimulate sales by unique design and by ornamentation, but not at the sacrifice of quality. England is extremely export conscious, far more so than the United States, for example. Her whole economic security, her future in fact, is dependent upon what she sells to the outside world. She can produce more textiles and machinery than she can consume. She must garner dollars to buy from dollar countries, United States and Canada, foodstuffs and raw material which she desperately needs. The export market is once again becoming highly competitive. Two of her greatest rivals in trade are making recovery fast, Germany and Japan, despite West Germany's former impoverished state, ruined by war and dismantlement on her industrial plants by Allied consent. She is rapidly recovering. Her heavy machinery exports to South America and to South Africa are making dangerous inroads into English markets in these lands. Japan is England's competitor in small products, but ones which are equally as profitable, such as textiles, ceramics, electrical, and household appliances. Japan's bid for the world market again is the building of a large tonnage merchant fleet to carry her products direct to the markets. Migration favored. The government, through its journals and editorial writers, constantly laments the overcrowding of the British Isles. I have formally commented on this in my accounts, but since England considers the matter so vital, it can be mentioned again as a current and increasingly pressing problem. The population of these isles is about 50 million. The relatively small area has never been able to produce enough foodstuff for the consumption of the populace in recent times. Now, with what can be called with reserve and practical dissolution of the empire, Food imports are costly and difficult to acquire for this vast population. In fact, though exports have greatly increased, the trade balance is far from favorable, and this latter is in no small part due to the large import of foodstuff. It has been suggested that an ideal condition would be to reduce the populace of the British Isles by 25 million people, this to be accomplished by migration to other nations of the Commonwealth. The paramount question is, who shall open their doors to this influx? The pouring of millions of persons into nations of the Commonwealth, even if the citizens approve of the migration, which many would, constitutes a serious threat to the economic balance of these other nations. Government authorities of England and editorial writers seem to think that Canada, Australia, and South Africa should, in particular, welcome with open arms this human surge. From my recent travels in these lands, I know that the people in them and their respective governments are quite cool to these unrealistic proposals, as they call them. England's view of the benefit of this migration to the Commonwealth nations is that it would make possible the rapid development of their as yet untouched natural resources. It would mean, she claims, cheaper raw materials, greater production, and would facilitate her own competition in world markets. England points to the development made by the United States in 1 century, making of it, as she says, the most powerful nation in the world today. This development, she explains, was due to the great migration to the United States from Europe. Something not mentioned, however, is that this great migration and increase in population in the United States has also brought about serious problems having economic roots. The United States is no longer able to be self-sufficient. 2 major wars and preparations for a potential third one have drained it of many raw materials. America is not now able to produce enough iron, for example, within the United States for defense and peacetime consumption. In other words, America is becoming more and more dependent on other nations for one or more commodities. It is natural that South Africa, Canada, and Australia think in terms of stabilizing and preserving their own resources for a steady long pull instead of an immediate boom. Frankly, they say, send us your capital and your technicians to develop industries. Large populations are not necessarily an asset in themselves. The Coronation. The recent coronation was a psychological inoculation for the people of the British Isles. It gave them a moment of free fancy. It was a welcome relief from the long years of war followed by those of austerity and bleak personal living. Vicariously, the people were able to participate in the finery, the pomp and circumstances of the occasion, which their own purses could not directly afford. Though different groups criticized the expenditures of the government for the coronation as extravagant, it was, in effect, a sagacious psychological move. It seemed to usher in a new era. It was a glimpse of a past glory and power. It renewed hope and stimulated initiative. The net result far offset the cost involved in this tonic to the mass morale. The young Queen Elizabeth II now is more than a symbol of an empire or of a nation's ideals. She seems to represent to the populace a kind of paradise lost, but in error the English hope can be regained. This era of hopefulness and the preparations for a constructive future have been reflected in the growth of the Rosicrucian order in England. A Rosicrucian rally recently held in London, which Frater James R. Whitcomb, Grand Treasurer of the AMORC, and the writer attended, was a great success. Hundreds of Rosicrucians from throughout the British Isles were there. The enthusiasm depicted the growing spirit of Rosicrucianism in England as well as growth in membership. Communist and trade. As is generally known on both sides of the Atlantic, the greatest issue between the United States and England is the matter of the latter's trading with Red China. I took it upon myself, through sources of information available to me, to gain a clear explanation of England's position in this matter. Concisely, England expounds several reasons why it trades with Red China. It has been criticized by United States interests for having negotiations with a tyrant nation. They reply that America, throughout its own history, has traded with revolutionary governments. The United States traded with the Soviets when they overthrew the Tsarist regime. The United States traded with Hitler's Germany, Perón's Argentina, and now with Tito's Yugoslavia and Franco's Spain. The fact that some of these are dominantly Catholic instead of communistic does not alter the fact that they are undemocratic and tyrannical. England further contends that America should be realistic and recognize the factual existence of the government in power in China. The Shanghai government is out. It has, they say, lost contact with the people. In fact, it never had a majority support of the Chinese people. It is not necessary, contends England, to support the political theory of Red China anymore than the United States supports the political idealism of Tito's government with which it trades. To refuse to trade with Red China, it is postulated, invites hatred, at least greatly intensifies it. If we are realistic and acquire diplomatic vision and do trade with Red China, we may, it is held, put a wedge between them and their Soviet supporters. England takes the position that the present government in China is opportunistic. It wishes to, and is, rapidly industrializing China. It wants to increase its export market. It would like to trade with the world as does Japan. On the other hand, if the West closes its doors to it, it has only one alternative: to dominate the East, to expand in Asia, to conquer the smaller nations so as to make them satellites and compulsory markets. Russia supports this opportunist conquest for its own political idealism and interest. Thus, Red China and the Soviets, so says England, go hand in hand in their own respective ends, which are disastrous to the West. Also, of course, from a realistic point of view, England's motives are not altogether separate from her own economic interest. However, in substance, what they propose is held to be diplomatically more logical than a further compromising or cementing of the friendship of the Soviet and of Red China by a trade boycott against the latter. England has made many mistakes in her world history. What nation has not? One of the most obvious, as admitted by herself, in her former relations with India. The English are, however, too diplomatically wise and too experienced in world relations for America to discard their suggestions in favor of a blatant chauvinism of some American senators. American diplomatic circles are aware of the logic of England's views in these matters. We will undoubtedly find the U.S. State Department supporting England's view in this matter in substance in the very near future. There will be qualifications, of course, but only sufficient to practically quiet those who oppose the trend now underway. To be continued. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.